Welcome to this lecture, which is organized under the auspices of the newly created Tagore Center for Global Thought here at the India Institute. And it's the second event that the center is holding this year. Just a few words about the center. The Tagore Center has been created through the generosity of the Indian government's Ministry of Culture, and it's been established with a clear purpose in mind. It's to enable greater exploration of an inquiry into India's rich modern intellectual traditions, and to connect these to some of the central arguments going on across the world today. The focus of the center, therefore, will not be Tagore's work per se, but rather the deeper themes that are encompassed in his work, which I think speak to core concerns worldwide today, about man and nature, about aesthetics and industrial society, about education, about creating a cosmopolitan patriotism, about cultural diversity and human freedom, themes that modern Indians have thought about and argued over a great deal. And it's to help explore some of these thoughts and arguments that the Tagore Center will engage in a range of different activities. So it offers 2 funded PhD scholarships to Indian students who wish to research the history of ideas and intellectual traditions of modern India. It's also able to support exchange visits for up to a semester by doctoral students from India who wish to spend time at the India Institute. And indeed, we're inviting applications for these right now. So if you know of good students in India who are thinking about such work, do encourage them. It will also host visiting Tagore Fellows and support a range of lectures, seminars, and workshops. And I'll, just before I turn to this evening's lecture, mention that we have several planned in the months ahead. In May, Professor Romila Thapar will deliver a Tagore Center lecture. In May, we'll also have Professor Tansen Sen of New York University speaking about China and India. And in November, we'll be hosting the first of our biannual Tagore Distinguished Lecture Series on architecture and urban form in 21st century India, to be delivered by one of India's leading architects and urbanists, Rahul Mehrotra, who is currently Dean of the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. But those are all later treats. Let us now turn to this evening's. It's a signal honor for the India Institute and the Tagore Center to be able to welcome Gopal Gandhi as our first Tagore Center Fellow and our lecturer this evening. Gopal is hardly a stranger in this city. Indeed, many of you in the audience will know him well from his time here in the early and mid-1990s as the founding director of the Nehru Center, when he made it really one of the most exciting cultural and intellectual venues in this city. It's truly hard to know how to summarily characterize his achievements, which are not merely many, but actually stretch across a wide variety of fields. Gopal Gandhi is one of India's most distinguished public servants, at home and abroad. By the end of his long career in the Tamil Nadu cadre of the Indian Administrative Service, he was Joint Secretary to the President of India, R. Venkatraman. After his years in London as director of the Nehru Center, he went on to be appointed as India's High Commissioner to South Africa, where he made a real mark at a very important point in that country's history. He then returned to Delhi to serve as secretary to another president of India, K.R. Narayanan. He was appointed India's High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, then ambassador to Norway, and he returned to India to become governor of West Bengal. From such a record, one might imagine a solid establishment figure. But in fact, Gopal has always been remarkable for his candor and his willingness to tell things as they are to his political counterparts. He is that rare thing, an intellectual who understands the workings of power without ever having been seduced by it. Perhaps that independence and self-assurance comes from his equally remarkable achievements in the other dimension of his life, as a writer and a scholar. For Gopal has also authored novels and plays, edited anthologies of his grandfather, the Mahatma's writings, translated Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy into Hindi, published volumes of essays, and continues to write regular columns in the national press. He holds several honorary degrees, has delivered many distinguished lectures, including the Nehru Memorial Lecture here in London 3 years ago. So I think you can see why we feel so privileged to have him here with us this evening. His title, too, promises to offer a fascinating lecture on a subject of immense importance to India today. At a time when some of the old linguistic and cultural tensions rooted in past history that marked relations between India's north and south have eased, only to be replaced by a sense that it is now the futures of the two regions that may be their real point of divergence, as the south pulls away and enters a virtuous circle of lower population growth, better health and social indicators, and higher economic growth. So let me not delay any further and hand over to Gopal Gandhi to deliver the first Tagore Fellow lecture entitled North and South in the Indian Political Imagination. Gopal.
Thank you, Sunil, for that very generous introduction and welcome. When you're on this long-distance flight from India and in the part of the aircraft which does not allow you to plug in your laptop, the best option for spending time intelligently is to watch in-house movies. And Mughal-e-Azam was the film, epic film, suitable for an epic journey that I watched not once, but I think twice on that flight. And the film began with a huge map of India rising from the ocean, I think, and speaking, saying, "Main Hindustan hoon," I am India. And then it goes on to say, the map, India, goes on to say, "I have been enslaved, I have been in chains, but my children have freed me from my chains. Emperors have ruled me, some ill and some well. And whenever those emperors have had troublesome sons, they have been banished by the emperor to the south." I knew what my subject is meant to be. The title of this lecture calls for a compass as also a rolled up map and a telescope. But what it does not need is a dysfunctional weather vane trying to pass for a Christopher Columbus. Now, north and south in India's political imagination can be taken to mean India's view of the globe as divided by Willy Brandt into sky blues and deep blues. But I will not be talking of that north and south, for I am no economist, whether of the development or of any other kind. Besides, we are meeting in London, where history and geography, politics, and other civilized subjects are discussed. We are not in Davos. And there's another reason, or rather a difficulty. India's political imagination is allied to the global south, but its professional aspirations are wholly tied to the global north. And India should, in all honesty, say, with Tennyson in his poem The Swallows, "I but wanton in the south, in the north long since my nest is made." The north and south that I'm going to speak on is about what used to be called Upper India, and about what that Upper India used to think of as the down there, where the bespectacled Madrasis throve on a diet of rice, tamarind paste, and buttermilk, all demonstrably great for the mathematical mind, the scientific bent, political audacity, medical genius, legal prowess, classical music, philosophical speculation, and spiritual intelligence, or in the form of names, the Ramanujans, the Ramans, the Rajagopalacharis, Ramaswamy Iyer, Ramaswamy Nayakar, Ramaswamy Mudaliyar, Rangachari, Ramanuja Iyengar, Radhakrishnans, and the one and only of his kind, Ramana, the great Maharshi. The world knows of the 3 R's. India's south knows them in multiples merging in the infinite. The Madrasi typification was as unacceptable to the varied communities of the Indian peninsula as it was a reflection on the North's interest in the South. Now, Ambassador Thomas Abraham has written of how pleasantly surprised he was when he found the late P.N. Huxer identify him, Abraham, as not only not a Madrasi, but a member of an obscure community called Syrian Christians hailing from an edge of the wedge called Kerala, speaking not Madrasi, but another fully developed language, Malayalam, cherishing theological and intellectual links with the Antioch of Damascus to its west and with Indonesia and Cambodia to its east. And one might add, eating not that North Indian disfigurement of the traditional dosa, which the North calls masala dosa, but appam and puttu, which belong to a cuisine wholly and gloriously independent of the Tamil country. A few things in geography can be more blinkered than that longitudinal droop conjured by the phrase north and south. Such is the role of shape and of morphology that India looks like a longitudinarian's dream, where West India and East India are marginal to the country's essentially polar axis. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari is a familiar and tedious figure of speech, emphasizing India's north-south orientation. India's width, west to east or east to west, matches its length north to south. From Khambat to Kohima makes as impressive a distance as from Srinagar to Srirangam. But no, Kanyakumari, Kashmir are the two axes. It is in India's geographical imagination, Kashmir to Kanyakumari. The from two verbal unscrollings meant to convey the image of a flowing extent will most certainly remain perpendicular. I cannot understand why. All I can say is that that droop is both illogical and ironic. The title of this first Tagore lecture itself is ironic, as it draws a curtain over that part of India into which Tagore was born, the East. It excludes exactly that from where Tagore related with sensitive immediacy to the restless river Teesta and the calm Kalimpong, to bewildering Calcutta, so imprisoned by custom as to routinely put goats to the knife in Kali's name, and so startlingly original as to name the street on which the US consulate stands after Ho Chi Minh. The title puts to aside also the tender village Shantiniketan, where Tagore founded his world university, Vishwabharati. To stay away in a Tagore lecture from that East, or worse still, to assume that India's East is somehow subsumed in India's North, is to mislay my compass, map, and telescope at the very start of the voyage. No Assamese, Khasi, Mizo, Angami, Sema, or Gorkha in Darjeeling is likely to see himself or herself as North Indian. Assam, the 7 states in India's northeast, Sikkim and Bengal are about India. They are not about North India. A simple test of the palate will tell us that a momo is very different from chicken made tandoori dhaba style. And turning westward, no Maratha, Konkanast, Goan, or Kurg would quite like to be called North Indian either. Was Shivaji the Chhatrapati a North Indian? Dadabhai Nauroji, Lokmanya Tilak, Madame Kama, Gokhale, Pandita Ramabai, and the intellectually unrivaled, politically far-sighted, and philosophically exceptional Baba Sahib Ambedkar, they were not North Indian. Hubli Dharwar in Karnataka boasts of the single largest concentration of classical musicians singing in the Hindustani tradition. But a simple test of the ear will tell us that the Dakhani Thumri is the Dakhani Thumri. The Purbi Thumri is the Purbi Thumri. And for that matter, the gentle people residing in the 36 coral islands that make Lakshadweep cannot regard themselves as South Indian, nor the tribal groups that left Marco Polo staggered in the Andamans think of themselves as South Indians. So a pivotal imagining of India as a whole, north, south, east, west, comes in Tagore's most frequently sung work, not his best, now India's national anthem. The opening line of Jana Gana Mana portrays the nation's territories starting inevitably once again, as per custom or habit, with India's north, Punjab, Sindh. And then it moves in step with the protocol of perpendiculars. In the next line, to India's south, Dravida. Now, Tagore's India was map in verse. It's a map in verse. Images a land spread entirely in keeping with anthropomorphic imagings of India's verticality. Northness is about being the crest. Southness is an extension of that northness. But the genius of poetic imagination in Tagore and a sense of balance makes him switch directions when he comes to India's mountain ranges. There he commences the Antara with Vindhya, bringing in the taller, longer, mightier Himachala, only after the Vindhya. Continents are made by time using a very blunt chisel and a very heavy hammer. But subcontinents are made by time using those very instruments in -2 size. Countries are shaped by the nail file of geopolitical time, and their imaginations are woven like a tapestry by epic narrations that grow out of a people's collective aesthetic. If the North's political imagination is aphasic about the South, the political imagination of the South goes amnesiac when it comes to North India's political history in general and its Mughal history in particular. It is said that the history of the world would have been different if Cleopatra's nose had been longer by something like an inch or shorter. But there is the legend about the Vindhya having been so irked by the attention which the sun paid to the beauteous Himalaya that the Vindhya decided to rise and keep rising higher and higher until they completely obscured the sun's view of the abode of the snows. And all hell, or all heaven, broke loose after that. But legends apart, speaking geohistorically, the original Indian tectonic plate's northeastern drift could well have impacted on the Indo-European plate so as to lift the Vindhya and the Satpura ranges in central India higher by several thousand feet. The Narmada, Tapti, Godavari, and the lesser rivers that rise from those ranges would then have been massive Niagara-style falls, would have emerged from them. But apart from making the anti-Narmada dam protest of Medha Patkar that much more difficult, what would have been the geopolitical result of a far higher and taller Vindhya? North India would have become a horizontal nightmare. It would have been held by and between two impassable mountain ranges extending west to east from the Indus to the Brahmaputra, leaving only a narrow pass for all human and non-human movement across the present Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and West Bengal. That flattened nation would have been a smaller version of west to east oriented countries like the USA, Russia, and China, and of course the exceptional Australia, requiring in India's epic imagination the exiled prince of Ayodhya to have to climb the Vindhya in Tenzing Norgay style or trek in Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's INA style through dense forests. But geohistorically speaking, the impassably tall Vindhya would have made northern kings think twice, not twice, but many times twice, before attempting southbound enterprises. The political imagination of such a nation would have known a much more intensified Islamic charge on its west and a far sharper Southeast Asian, perhaps Buddhist voltage to its east. And a very self-conscious Hindu middle would have had to anchor itself firmly in and around Banaras. With Karachi, Banaras, and Calcutta as the three centers of contrarian power, the political imagination of that compressed west to east nation can be imagined. Contestation would have been fierce, armed conclusions strictly temporary. Scepter and crown would have tumbled down in high frequency, as would have social order and political equilibrium. A Tagore and a Gandhi in Aryavarta, as that mountain-trapped nation may well have got to be called around Banaras, would have had their work cut out for them. But this is not entirely fantasy. Something like that, in kind and in degree, has happened, even with the Vindhyas being only just as tall as they are. The peninsula south of the Vindhya, conversely, would have then found itself a lean and progressively leaner nation, with its own north lying somewhere around Nashik, its center around Bellary, the rest forming its own south. Dravidam, as the pendulous nation may have come to be called, would have been among the north to the south-oriented nations of the world, as many Latin American countries are. Britain, Norway, Italy, Europe, Myanmar, Korea, Vietnam, and Asia are all north to south oriented. Not a very large country, such an imaginary Dravidam would yet have been a major country, and being flanked by the Arabian Sea to the west and Bay of Bengal to the east, far more comfortably linked to the wider world than Aryavarta would have been. Its coastline thrumming to intellectual, cultural, and commercial intercourse, every coastal town of that nation would have been a buzz. Bombay, Goa, Mangalore, Cochin looking west, Madras, the Coromandel coast, Vizag, and Paradip looking east would have been world-class ports many centuries ago. Of India's present coastline of about 7,500 kilometers, as many as 5,500 kilometers would then have been the coastline of Dravidam, peninsular India. That, too, is not imaginary. Much has happened along this storyline. Arabs landed in the south by sea to trade, settle, and take root, not on horseback, to plunder, pillage, and go away. Christianity came to the south in missions, not on commissions. And in 1498, Vasco da Gama rounding the Cape of Good Hope, whose story could only have been told by one with a name like Sanjay Subramaniam. Fortunately for most, the legend of the Vindhya rising higher and higher remains legend, and the Vindhya are only as high as they are. And as a consequence, Sanskrit, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the works of Kalidas and Kautilya, and the great edicts of Ashoka have been able to travel north to south without geological hindrance or political custom houses. Northern themes have met southern talent, as in the Buddha story finding artists in the fresco secco at Ajanta, and Jaina themes discovering the right painters and the right pigments for the wall art at Sittannavasal. J.B.S. Haldane has the marvelous essay on being the right size. The Vindhya have been just the right size, enabling human, social, and cultural access, but making a political flood of stampeding footfalls just that much less easy. Though about 600 miles long alone, and at its greatest height a mere 3,650 feet high, the Vindhya and the Satpura have influenced the political imagination of India decisively. They have shaped by distancing and defined by separating the history and the politics of the regions of its north and south. They have, over the centuries, demarcated northern from peninsular India, and they have in the process created two spaces, clear spaces, at once cultural, intellectual, and political, for what used to be and mercifully is now less described as Aryan India and Dravidian India. The distinguished sociologist Andre Bethey has explained that the terms Dravidian and Aryan are best corrected to read as the Dravidian family of languages and the Indo-Aryan family of languages, adding the scientific and very important fact that no hard and fast lines can be drawn in racial, that is biological terms, between the peoples of North and South India. Reflective minds in the North have contemplated over the centuries that not too easily accessible and yet not too distant lands south of the Vindhya with intellectual curiosity. Rulers of the great centralizing empires of the North did so as well, sometimes with material greed and often, pertinently for us, with plain geopolitical appetite. The great Mauryan, Ashoka, did not have an Ashokan Brahmi equivalent for the phrase geopolitical, but the southern rims of his domain quivered to his dreams of extending his dharma. To Ashoka must go the credit for what Professor Romila Thapar has aptly described as the emergence of empire. This emergence is not just a history book chapter beginning. It defines the India of today, which Dr. Ambedkar has described both as an aspiration and as a reality in a memorable phrase, a single imperium. As Ashoka's political imagination expanded, so did his empire's boundaries, and so did too, inevitably, the political borders of his subjects' minds. With Megasthenes coming to him as the ambassador, and his own of Greece, and his own daughter Sanghamitra going to Ceylon as his representative, India's political canvas stretched as it had never before. And Megasthenes' Indica became the bibliographical feasibility which in an earlier era might have been titled by another visiting Seleucid ambassador, not Indica, but Anarchica. And besides conveying the emperor's philosophy and his vision, Ashoka's major and minor edicts traveling south served as markers of empire on the north to south, east to west expanse that was his immense realm. Professor Upinder Singh has explained the spread. A total of some 57 Ashokan edicts, inscriptions, have been found at various places, 57. Out of these, 45 are in what can be called North India, and 12 in what can be called South India, clustered around the Andhra-Karnataka border. Now, what does that tell us? First, that the South was integral to the emperor's political and dharmic imagination. Second, he tried to break the physical and, more importantly, the psychological Vindhya barrier non-acquisitively. Third, that he and his southern edicts, positioned like the graven equivalents of royal visiting cards, made a statement. Ashoka's edicts can, in the language of crass commerce, be called a North Indian intellectual product with distinct geographical indicators as to origin of make and position of application. Their occurrence as such in southern India did something else that was more important than any of these. It signposted the route towards the south for all north-south political interaction, the good and the less than good, the sublime and the sinister, and also what Professor Ehrenfels in a 1961 essay has described as the North's aggressiveness, manliness, and strength. Two trajectories in the opposite direction bear recall. The first of these was about the opposite of manliness and aggressiveness. Strictly and splendidly intellectual, Adi Shankara traveled in the reverse south to north direction, exercising an impact no other single traveler's south to north path has had in pan-India terms. Born in Malabar, Nehru writes of Shankara, Shankara strove hard to synthesize the diverse currents that were troubling the mind of India of his day. That phrase of Nehru's, the mind of India, like Professor Sunil Khilnani's the idea of India, is gripping. But I would say in Shankara's context that he impacted not so much on the mind of India as on the India of the mind. That India, the India of the mind, is to be encountered everywhere, in India's north no less than its south. But to that extent, Shankara's Advaita did impact specifically on the north to where he was headed. The imagination of India's political north, the north which is about the uses and abuses of power, and therefore about real life and death issues, remained uninfluenced by the mental throughput of this peregrinating southern Acharya. And why? It is natural for the human intellect to pedestal the intellect, but feeling, as Nehru calls the non-intellectual propulsion of human actions, feeling is neither independent of human consciousness, nor is it a lesser response. Like the Buddha himself, Ashoka responded to his life-changing experience first with what Nehru would call feeling, and only thereafter attempted its rational analysis and reasoned propagation. If Shankara's intellectually sophisticated concept of Advaita could not do to the political and real-life imagination of his and later times what the Buddha's simple idea of dukkha did with Ashoka's, it is because emotion and feeling charge the imagination and propel action no less than observation and analysis. The generalizations are notoriously off the mark, but this one I might risk. Just as Hindustani music is said to be high on melodics and Carnatic music high on its mathematics, India's north has brought to India's political imagination the gifts and taxes of emotion, impulse, and feeling. India's south has brought to it the boons and exactions of reason, cogitation, and analysis. A second expedition in the south to north direction is that of Rajendra Chola, who in circa 1022 led an army up to the north. He did not intend to make an empire, create a kingdom, or hold any power to the north. If he had, India's history would have taken a very curious turn. Babur would have had to meet Telugu and Tamil counterparts in the thorns and thickets of the north. But that did not happen. Rajendra Chola has inhabited and excited the political imagination of the south for centuries, for this among other accomplishments. But he means nothing north of the Vindhyas. The Indian north's aphasic out-of-touchness with the political history of the south, even where it involved the north, impoverishes its political, historical, experiential imagination. And it does more, it does worse. it sets up and raises in light obscuring height a harmful vindhya of ununderstanding and engenders, unintentionally of course, a latent colonialism in its sites of the south. Exemplifying Ehrenfels's observation of the 14th century interest of Alauddin Khilji's in the Deccan as a land of unexplored power and wealth is worth pursuing. Khilji's expeditions, led by his slave general Malik Kafur, gave the south, as ruled by the Kakatiya and the Hoysala, its first real taste of North India's appetite for the south's material resources. And the most vivid symbol of the imperialist appetite of India's northern empires is the seizure from the Kakatiya in Warangal of the famed Kohinoor. That glittering stone, of which the original name was Shamantakamani, lies burdened with its memories today in London. Not because of the Treaty of Lahore, the nimbleness of Lord Dalhousie, the gullibility of Prince Dilip Singh, or the diamond interests of Queen Victoria, but because the north-south contestations of India robbed its rightful owners of the diamond and turned it into a bauble to be tossed from grasping hand to grabbing fingers. If there is such a thing as the natural home of a diamond, though Kohinoor's is not London, not Delhi, not Lahore, it is the Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh. But far more important than the location of that much shrunk diamond in any physical site is its location in the tapestry of India's political imagination. India's loss of the Kohinoor, the mountain of light, reveals a valley of darkness in which India's north has groped about India's assets in the condensed intellect, the cryptic wisdoms, and the compressed aspirations of its south. While the north has never stopped lamenting the Ghaznavid's sack of Somnath, the south has noted and, like a sound bureaucrat, filed away the Khilji's decamp of the Noor. The south of the Vindhyas posed a challenge that could not be ignored, a geopolitical dream for the north, whoever controlled it. But in that story of India's political imagination, cultural and political resources have been as energizing as the purely strategic and militaristically tactical. The great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, have not just religious, cultural, valuational domain, but they have a political realm as well. And the year 1992 reminded us of that fact in the most bizarre way possible. And though no one has really felt the need to say so, Rama and Krishna are subliminally, not formally, not intellectually, not academically, but subliminally, Rama and Krishna are perceived by the peoplehood of India as northern, as are the principal players in those epics, with Ravana and his unfortunate family alone being pushed as southward as creative deconstruction can go. Now, this has reinforced the rock of India's political north-centeredness with the plaster of powerful epic narration. The evolution of India's political imagination, no less than its cultural imagination, received an unexpected royal propulsion when not a Mauryan, Guptan, Cheran, Chalukyan, but a Mughal emperor, Akbar, had the Ramayana given the throne's notice. At Akbar's bidding, the works were translated into Persian and illustrated miniature style. I find it politically significant that Akbar also had gold coins minted depicting Rama's story, Rama and Sita going to the forest, which of course lay for Akbar in the deep south. And this reflects the need, even of the great Mughal, for a royal co-option of a royal Rama, a prince endowed with a certain moral authority to charge his royal prerogatives. The Ramayana's storyline is about royal prerogatives, royal duties, royal trust, royal betrayal, the royal word, the royal code. And Akbar's great-grandson, the Prince Darashuko, had the Yoga Vashishta translated likewise into Persian. But unlike Akbar, Dara was motivated by exclusively theological, not political gain. Now, tough men for tough tasks and punishment posts are not a British civil service phenomenon alone. Prince Aurangzeb was sent off to the Deccan, as the film Mughal-e-Azam promised, as viceroy by his father, Emperor Shah Jahan, to subdue the dangerously recalcitrant Nizami dynasty, and then once again for a punishment, a second time to the Deccan after a face-off with his brother, the Prince Darashuko. Both as prince and later as Badshah, Aurangzeb turned adversity to opportunity and made the Deccan, traditionally poor of resources and revenue, yield valuable returns, both political and financial, to the imperial treasury, and extend his map from Kabul, as it was claimed, to Kanyakumari. But in the political imagination of India today, Akbar is a benign figure, Aurangzeb a real-life despot, to be either admired or hated depending on which side of India's fault line you are standing on, and Dara Shikoh a lovable irrelevance. But whether loved, hated, or ignored, the Mughals fertilized the political imagination of India's north. To the south, that dynasty, the Mughal dynasty, is only a string of names from another planet. The south has its own dynasties, which to the north belong to another cosmos. But one image that does wonders in both the hemispheres of India's political self-vision comes in the shape of Mother India. Merging effortlessly into Bankim's magnetic song, the Vande Mataram, Bharat Mata has the Himalaya for a coronet and is adorned with necklace strings representing her rivers with their catchments in the north. Her radiant face, mind are coextensive and interchangeable with India's north. Struggling as it does the entire subcontinent, its morphology superimposes without a crinkle the goddess's head and face over what could be India's own. And although myths are myths, constructs of the imagining mind, the human mind is not a myth, it is real. A billion minds believing in what may be a myth are a billion realities of their own kind. I referred to the nail file of geopolitical time. The nail file operations of the Raj were essentially military engagements and political hustlings at psychologically opportune points through treaties such as the Treaty of Amritsar, which 200 years ago Charles Metcalfe worked out for Lord Minto. The deal gave Maharaja Ranjit Singh a sense of proprietorship over the lands to the west of the Sutlej, leaving the tracts on its east, including Delhi, to the East India Company. With this new attention being lavished on it by London and Calcutta, India's north was set to become once again the site of contestations for power and military one-upmanship, a tenuous but tenacious template for authority, a born-again and expanded Agra of the Mughal Empire, and a palladium of sovereign glory. Now, tactics work in the short term. Strategies, perhaps, in the mid-term. But destiny works termlessly. That 1809 line, which should have really been called the Metcalfe line, turned into a fault line that remains charged and sparks to this day, and not in the westerly direction alone. The Treaty of Amritsar can, in fact, be termed Metcalfe's folly or Napoleon's revenge. In the decades that followed the Treaty of Amritsar, Sir Henry Mortimer Durand and Sir Henry McMahon arrived on Indian soil to do another Metcalfe, carrying very thick-nibbed pens and very thin paper scrolls. They drew new boundaries on old sites, lending their names to the great lines. The Durand line, the McMahon line, began what was to be attempted more dramatically in the 20th century. Manicuring borders, that absorbing peacetime preoccupation, saw, as we all know, Curzon create in 1905 a border virtually out of nothing in Bengal. Destiny unravels the cleverest ravels. Now, unbeknownst to him, unwilled by him, the maker of the two Bengals, East and West, also managed to consolidate what Metcalfe had started in the previous century. Curzon's partitioning of Bengal and the annulment of that partition come or go together. The post-annulment arrangement, including the repositioning of the capital of India from its easterly leaning to the heart of medieval Delhi. There, in the cluster of abandoned forts and in and around which graziers shepherded their flock of fleece, the palladium of political power moved from Calcutta to Delhi. This revived the latent northness in India's political imagination. And Nizamuddin Aulia's old curse, "Hunuz Dilli Durast," Delhi is still far yet, acquired the yearning and the dejection of a new northerly sigh. And thanks to Aurobindo and the Bengal revolutionaries, Bhagat Singh and the Punjab bravehearts, the image of Mother India, reinforced by Bankim's Vande Mataram, stirred once again. Nirod Chaudhary tells us in his riveting autobiography of how he, as tiny Nirod, went around his hometown with his friends singing a popular song, if I should die, by our mother let me die, fighting for my land. And then Nirod says, stopping near an armed sentry, he hurled those lines with the greatest gusto at the man, snapping his tiny fingers at him and yelling and dancing in cannibalistic exultation, with the poor fellow looking on helplessly. Now, the theological charge of the image electrified the South no less than the North. Mother India has electrified both parts of India, or all four sections of India. Subramanya Bharati giving us the magnetic song, Yengal Thai, which means our mother. But while the Mother India and the Vande Mataram voltage stiffened the whole section of North India's population, which does not worship idols, it did not, 1,000 mercies, quite have the same anti-magnetic effect in the South. Shades of Metcalfe and of Curzon hovered over the Radcliffe lineation in 1947, equitably dividing 175,000 square miles of territory with 88 million inhabitants in all of 5 weeks. In creating the new state of Pakistan, the lines extinguished West Punjab and East Bengal. That was the effect of what Sir Cyril Radcliffe and his fellow commissioners did, even if that was not their intention. The priority of that very cerebral law lord who had been asked to play God and Curzon, not very different things, on the subcontinent of India, was, I suspect, to finish his job and get as fast back to London as an aeroplane could take him. But lop off India's flanks to the right and to the left, Sir Cyril and his fellow commissioners did. And more than ever before, the North became India's center and the center the North. Of its many adjustments, India's 1947 adjustment was simply to pain. The neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran has given us the phrase phantom limbs. North, West, and East India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh know what that expression means, phantom limbs. They know what phantom pain means. East Punjab, now Punjab, can feel West Punjab in its attenuated veins, even as West Bengal can imagine in a very real sense its earlier life in East Bengal, and both, of course, vice versa. But sub-Indian Indian peninsular geomorphology can never know phantom limbs. The South has been saved by geography from the trauma of geopolitical amputation and partitions. But the South has not escaped another phantom effect at one remove beyond that of phantom limbs. And in my view, that has been no less tragic a phantom effect. The North, inclusive of the East and West, has had to endure wave after wave of invasions with loot and rapine in their wake, and has had to adjust to violence by becoming counter-violent. The South has not had to do any such thing. Thanks to the Treaty of Amritsar and its successors, India's North, with alas its East and West, has been a theatre for sectarian egos to spar in, competing intolerances to thrive in, and for a violent school of politics to grow out of, a theatre to see bitter discord between Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh move along the old fault line created by and becoming a demand for partition, then partition itself, with thousands migrating in opposite directions, killed in the very moment of panic. Conventional wars were to explode in the North, and in time unconventional militancies were to take cover in and to slouch out of there, mutilating life on both sides of the fault line. The same North was also, as if by countdown logic, to inevitably see, and this is many decades later, but to see inevitably, feel and quake under a series of nuclear tests, called at first peaceful, and later nothing in particular, just tests, at which now, this time, not Napoleon, but may the Emperor Ashoka forgive us, an encoded Buddha smiled. This sequence populates the human experience of the North. It paints the political imagination of North India, but it does leave the South out. For the South, the North is not a phantom limb, it can never be, but it remains the phantom Arctic which the South would like to reach and embrace politically, intellectually, a prospect in which the North seems to have little interest. I find this tragic. Tragic for the North rather than more than for the South. Tragic for the singularity, so different from sameness of the single imperium. Taking India's population at a rounded all-India population projection of 1.4 billion, we have a North India tally of 1,000 million people and a South India tally of 400 million. If we deduct the East and the West from the North, India tally is like this. North India, 600 million. South India 400 million, West India 200, East India 200. For any country with a north to south likeness such as India's, this balanced ratio, 6:4:2:2, is reassuringly fair. But nevertheless, shades of the Aryavarta Dravidam scene can be seen working in India yet, with India's north being, among the four segments, the preponderant segment. And one palimpsest on India's political imagination that owes nothing to any invader or foreign ruler is its system of castes. Where and when it comes from, who its authors are, and what has caused its vice-like grip on India's imagination will never be understood. Equally in its north and its south, caste has ruled India's political thinking. From being the determinant of social relations, it has moved on to the gradients of power to impact and influence political relations. Gandhi made the moral deficiency of caste apparent. Ambedkar made its political and social bankruptcy the subject of national cogitation and later of constitutional attention. Democracy has made all the people of India equal as voters, but the reservation of seats for Dalit India in elected bodies, while ensuring representation, has also perpetuated identity fixations. India's political imagination is today a triptych of region, religion, and caste. Of these, region situates, religion anoints, and caste, which is the most complex, either enslaves or empowers. And in all three, privileging as a medicament has brought physic to the part, but adverse side effects to the whole. This is because India lives in its parts, but dreams its dreams as a collectivity. Does that configuration leave space, conceptual space, for an Indian political imagination? Not without some difficulty, yes. Normally subservient to the regional political imagination, an Indian political imagination surfaces unbidden and strong when placed under strain by a third force such as that of nature or of another nation. And of course, not to forget, very specifically, a neighborhood political aspiration and dreams. In the cultural imagination of India, North and South are scattered kin. In its political imagination, North and South of India are North and South's close neighbors. The single imperium is a dream house by day and a house of dreams after nightfall. India's political imagination today is, to put it reductionally, a collection of regional imaginations, a compilation of local memories, a compendium of worksite and homestead fears, and even nightmares. And let me turn for a moment, or rather return to the imagination of Rabindranath Tagore in the same work, Jana Gana Mana. The text of the official version is an abridged one, which we do not always know, or rather, which we do not always understand. The full unabridged version, unknown to most, has the following and most somber and startlingly prescient lines. Ghora timira ghana nibida nishidhe, pidita murchita deshi. Roughly translated, the lines invoke the benign mother to come to the aid of India, which is in deep darkness, which is afflicted, comatose, seeing nightmares of terror. Dushopne, atonke, rokha korile onke. Different parts of India at different times in their political experience, and some parts like the valley of Kashmir, Manipur, the swathe of lands that have come under Maoist influence, the Jungle Mahal, have known darkness, affliction, terror. The lines are not, as I said, part of the anthem, but depending on which part of India they're being consciously recalled in and when, they are part of the political experience and therefore the current political imagination of that part of India. A decade after Tagore wrote that song, a South Indian intellectual in nationalist politics wrote in his prison diary something which would be endorsed strongly by current political sentiment across India. We all ought to know, wrote Rajagopalachari, that Swaraj will not at once, or I think even for a long time to come, be better government or greater happiness for the people. Now, this was being written by a future Governor General of India when he was still a prisoner of the British Raj. Independence will not at once or even for a long time to come be better government or greater happiness for the people. Elections and their corruption, injustice and the power and tyranny of wealth and inefficiency of administration will make a hell of life as soon as freedom is given to us. Now, if those were strong words, stronger ones were to follow. Men will look regretfully back to the old regime of comparative justice and efficient, peaceful, more or less honest administration. The only gain from independence will be that as a race, we will be saved from dishonor and subordination. That was a politician's far-seeing political imagination. Gandhi in this, as in so many other aspects, was an exception. Thanks to his 21 formative years in South Africa, he had come to know and value politically no less than in other ways India's South, which gave him hundreds of volunteers. But his equation with the South was something of a unique personal attribute. It did not reflect the Congress's priorities. Of the 50 plus individuals who have held the office of Congress President before India became independent, no more than 4 hailed from the South. Of the 58 Congress pre-independence annual sessions, only 8 were held in the South, 7 in Madras and 1 in Kokonada. Stalwart leader and front-ranking associate of Gandhi though he was, Rajagopalachari never became Congress President. Perhaps his prison diary entry had something to do with it. Post-independence, the Congress presidency statistics are only slightly better. And as India's last Governor General, Rajagopalachari came as close as anyone could to becoming India's first president. But with Rajendra Prasad's elevation, in a sense it was the North that won. A wag in Madras consoled Tamil sentiment by saying, "Let us take heart from the fact that President Rajendra Prasad is after all named after our own Rajendra Chola." And the ceremonial office of the president itself has rotated very judiciously between North and South, rather less so between East and West. Of the 13 presidents of India, 6, including the philosopher Radhakrishnan, have been from the South. But then again, the political imagination of the South has not forgotten that the philosopher statesman Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan should really have become president in 1957, when the good but increasingly office-attuned Rajendra Prasad was given by the overwhelmingly North Indian Electoral College a second term. More to the point, of the 12 Indians or more who have been Prime Minister, India's most political office, only 2 have been from the South, P.V. Narasimha Rao and H.V. Devegowda, the latter having held the office too briefly to have made any impact. While Khilji's hordes very mindfully took away a diamond from the South, their political successors have replaced, almost absent-mindedly, that diamond with the rock of thoughtless indifference. Does the North's indifference to the South rankle in the South's political imagination? The truthful and considered answer to that question is no, for the reason that the South is, both geologically and psychologically, a very mature and stable terrain, but also because the South knows that a disproportionate incumbency of the highest office of the land notwithstanding, the South has had a voice, even a defining voice, in the governance of the country. The South has given India a number of foreign ministers, finance ministers, foreign secretaries, one of whom we are privileged to have with us here today. 2 out of its not so many, 3 national security advisors, designers of the nuclear bomb and nuclear policy, and most recently, the author of the All India scheme of personalized identification numbers for its population of 1 billion plus. Seeing which phenomenon, Upper India is in some awe and some envy, left with the one political monopoly that I have mentioned, 1.5 exceptions apart, the office of the Prime Minister of India. There was a time in the 1950s and 60s when North-South political tensions simmered like foam on good Mysore coffee over popularly felt resentments of the dominance of Hindi and generally over a perceived cultural subordination by the North of the South. In other words, the South of that era knew the Ehrenfels effect and responded to the new versions of Northness with the Dravidian movement revitalizing the understudied role of the Justice Party under the galvanic leadership of Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy and his charismatic colleague C.N. Annadurai, whose Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam has been in its 2 forms in power continuously since 1967. But full marks to the people of India's north and south, that even if the memory of political resentment remains, the edge has been taken out of it. Hindi, largely due to Hindi teleserials and Hindi cinema, flourishes in the south, the language itself being spoken with increasing proficiency by the young of their own very wise volition. And Hindi actresses are heroines in Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam films, with A.R. Rahman, the Oscar-winning music mixer of Madras, liquidizing the north-south cultural divide by composing and singing to huge effect in Hindi, Hindustani, and the languages of the south with a pesky and admirable felicity. But the fact remains that the political imagination of India's north continues to be about the north. Even the east and the west, Deccan, are really speaking rather out of it. The sense of fairness, political sagacity, and security concerns do make the center repair the damage as far as the northeast is concerned. But as political constructs, the center and the north remain coextensive and interchangeable in a sense in which the center and the south are not. It is only natural that the political imagination of India's south cannot take political India's north-centeredness without being intelligently resentful. Phantom pain in the political imagination of India's south comes not from any amputation of limbs. It comes from the almost certainly unintentional, but equally certainly uncalled for anesthetizing by India's more powerful northern half of its equation with India's southern half. And that even as it utilizes the intellectual resources of the southern half for the nation's good, technologically, intellectually, and in areas of niche talent. The number one foreign policy issue in India's political imagination is Pakistan and its attitude to Kashmir. For India's north, including India's west rather more than its south, this is shot through with what is euphemistically called the minority question. Even as secular liberals in both communities are on the same page, fundamentalists on both sides are each other's strongest allies. They stay in business by keeping tensions up. They would not want composite dialogue or understanding. And fundamentalists of both sides keep India's political imagination inflamed by this question. Terror is a truism, but terror also dehumanizes the political sensitivity of people who hate terror. This is no truism, but a new reality. The widespread sentiment in favor of the death sentence for convicted terrorists has less to do with justice than with revenge, less to do with the cold letters of law than with the hot coals of rage. But unsurprisingly, but significantly, the major voices raised in India today against capital punishment have come from its south, with the Chennai-based daily The Hindu editorializing powerfully against it, not from India's north. The great challenge before India is to be able to see the terrorist as a terrorist, not a Pakistani as a Pakistani, not necessarily as a Muslim as another person, and not a proxy Pakistani. The pity is that there is no towering personality like Jayaprakash Narayan on the Indian scene today to tilt the windmills of vengeance and tell India that it should not nourish medieval hates in its modern mind. And so, do India's north and south contest or converge in its political imagination? Truthfulness is lean, truth-telling very obese. It can say many things, none untrue, but still at a certain remove from the whole truth. No wonder courts insist on truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which made my late brother, Ramachandra Gandhi, waiting in the dentist's parlor, say, "Doctor, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." A series of generalized truths are preferable to specific falsehoods. Having suffered for just being where it is, within easy reach of invaders and marauders, India's political imagination in the north is a desert camp of fugitive ideas needing to flee from wrong place, wrong time, wrong religion, wrong caste, wrong party, wrong patron. It is also a recruitment camp of furtive hopes, wanting to find the right road, the right shelter, the right leader, the right cause. It is a green room, India's political imagination is, for changing moods, a new laugh to ease an old pain, and a new faith to heal an old betrayal. It is also a clinical psychologist's chamber, where memories compete with fears about itself as a field of challenges, a theater of tests, and yes, as an expanse of pain. These memories, by one small twist of a forgotten frame, become agonies. And these fears become, with but one untwisting of a hidden coil, nightmares. India's political imagination is painted by a very broad brush. Two swathes like the Brant deep blue and sky blue divide the canvas. The era of the freedom struggle and the new age of the republic. Both have allure, and yet the first is seen as the era of the spirit, and the second as that of its shell. The north invokes the peacock throne, the south the Kohinoor. But they are metaphors both, throne and stone. It is not as if in moving from spirit to shell, the peacock throne is gone. The peacock throne is there in a sense in its physical form in all the institutions and associations and organizations and structures of Delhi. The peacock throne is there. But from its throne of political ideas, the peacock has flown. It is not as if the Kohinoor is lost. It is there in a certain style. But from the Koh, the mountain of political aspiration, the Noor, the light, is fled. And this is no imagination, political or other. It is a reality. And yes, it embraces, or shall I say, it grabs both the north and the south. The north in India's political imagination is about arms, mostly illegal, including AK-47s, which bullies carry like boys carry guitars, openly, and with pride to settle or open scores. The south is also about ideas, about deals, mostly secret, including those about land, mines, and plantations, which then lubricate political engines. But if imagination is capable of sound, the sound of India's political imagination, north and south today, is of a deep sigh, a long, deep, and audible respiration of regret and yearning from the peoplehood of India, the rural poor and the urban homeless, specimens of a humanity which belongs everywhere and nowhere, unsure of identity, unhopeful of dignity, and by an unfair throw of luck's dice, tossed into a vortex of uncertainty. There is in India's political imagination a vacuum, a sense of loss, of something that there was and now there is not. Faith in the road, hope in the goal. And yes, they converge, the two imaginations would be the truthful answer as to whether north and south do meet. But they meet with a ridge down the middle of the imagination, standing for the Vindhya of memories and the Satpura of the north's political indifference. And therefore, in terms of political understanding, mutuality and reciprocation, Delhi remains for the south still, who knows, Durast. But do these, and can these specimens of the Homo sapien, the frightened Meitei, the desperately poor Agaria, the homeless urban, have anything to do with a province, a region, a state? In the scamper for a livelihood, ultimately, there is no north and there is no south, and there is indeed little imagination. Mother India's image reverberated recently in the campaign against corruption led by Anna Hazare as an enormous stage backdrop. But it had to be moved from there when it was pointed out to the good Anna that his sympathizers and potential supporters from the liberal secular circles of India would be uncomfortable with that image. Icons are needed, and icons of a parental kind are needed. So the image of Mother India was replaced by the image of the father of the nation. India is home to wise children and very childish adults. Its political imagination can be and is at once very jejune and very sublime. I thank you.
All I can and will say is to thank you, Gopal, for just a truly brilliant unraveling of the fixities of North and South, and for restoring by your own words the power of the historical and political imagination. No questions, but I now invite you all to a drinks reception at which you'll have a chance to meet our lecturer for this evening. Thank you.